When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I should begin with a confession. I did not stumble upon that village by accident. I was led there, drawn as surely as a moth is drawn to a lantern's flame. The first whisper of it reached me in a tea house, where the air was thick with smoke, the tables crowded with men who spoke only in half-truths and glances. It was late, and yet one story cut through the drunken laughter like a cold wind. It was the story of a red bridal sedan chair that moved through the night without men to carry it. Perhaps you think you have heard such tales before. I thought so as well. But once this particular story found its way into my ears, it clung to me like the scent of old incense burned into the wood of a shrine. It followed me across towns and provinces, a shadow stitched to my heels. They called it the crimson sedan of the bride who never rested. The village lay tucked between hills, half forgotten even by the maps. The road that led to it narrowed as though ashamed, twisting between bamboo groves that whispered secrets when the wind passed through. Travelers in the larger towns hesitated when I asked for directions. Their eyes darted aside, their mouths pressed thin. And yet, in their reluctance, I found all the confirmation I needed. One man, emboldened by too much wine, muttered, "On the night of the full moon, the sedan walks the road again. Lanterns swaying, curtains closed, a bride still inside." He would not meet my eyes after he said it. You must understand, I have spent years following such rumors. Folklore is both my pursuit and my curse. I write them down in journals stained with tea and rain, as though pinning moss to a board. Though I often wonder if it is the moss that pin themselves to me. Each tale is a door, and I am unable to resist turning the handle, even knowing that what waits on the other side is not meant for the living. The red sedan was such a tale. The legend spoke of a marriage. A young bride, unwilling but bound by her family's will, carried away in a sedan veiled with crimson silk. She never returned home. From that night forward, they say, the sedan reappears beneath the moon, its lacquer still red, its lanterns still lit. Though centuries have passed, it is not only the sedan they speak of, but the sounds, the clack of wooden sandals against the earth when no one is near, the muffled beat of drums, low and slow, as though coming from beneath the soil itself, the sigh of silk moving against wood, though no hands touch it. One farmer, I was told, went out on a moonlit night to fetch water from the village well. When he returned, his face was drained of color, his hands trembling so badly that the ladle clattered from his grip. He claimed he had seen a trail of red fabric slip around the corner of the lane, vanishing as he gave chase. He swore the hem of a gown brushed the dirt before him. Within a month, the farmer was dead. There are patterns to these stories. Always the color red, always the silence of those who lived in the village, and always the impression that the tale was less an invention and more a wound. For that is what the red sedan felt like to me before I ever laid eyes upon it. A wound. A wound dressed in silk, carried forward by generations who could neither forget nor speak of it. When I first entered the village, I saw at once what the silence meant. The old men in the wine shops turned their backs as I asked my questions. The women at the well hurried away, their buckets swaying as though afraid the water itself might overhear. Even the children, those mischievous creatures who so often delight in frightening strangers, grew solemn when I pressed them. They looked at me with eyes far older than their years, then turned away without a word. You see, it is not disbelief that breeds silence. It is belief, the kind that is too heavy to bear, too dangerous to speak. Still, scraps of detail found their way to me. They always do. The sedan, they said, is always red, though rain and sun should have long ago stripped its lacquer. The red glows, as though fresh paint bleeds beneath the surface. 4 lanterns hang from its corners, swaying though no wind stirs. The curtains are drawn tight, but shadows shift within. And sometimes, when the night is especially still, one hears the faint sound of weeping. Not the sharp cry of fear, but the weary sobbing of someone who has cried for centuries and found no release. The road where it is seen lies along the edge of the fields, beyond a cluster of ancient willows. The villagers do not walk it after dusk. Even the dogs will not cross it. One night in the tea house, I listened as 2 men argued. One swore that his cousin had seen the sedan pass, its lanterns burning, though no men stood beneath it to bear the weight. The other begged him to stop, trembling so hard that the tea spilled from his cup. "Do not bring her here with your word," he whispered. "Her, not it." The red sedan was never spoken of as an object. She was always someone. That was when I understood the truth of the silence. The villagers were not merely afraid of a ghost story. They were afraid of memory. They were afraid of a life once lived, a life broken and forced into silence. And I realized then, though I did not yet admit it, that I would walk to that road on the night of the full moon. I have told myself often that I chase these tales for study, for history, for the preservation of folklore. But the truth is darker. Some stories do not belong to books. They belong to the shadows, to the cracks between this world and the next. And when one lingers too long in your thoughts, when one presses against you like a cold hand on your back, you must follow it or be haunted forever. The red sedan pressed against me so. It urged me forward, even as the villagers turned away, even as my better judgment whispered that some doors should remain closed. So remember, dear listener, before we go further, this is not a tale of superstition, nor a simple ghost story meant to frighten children. This is the story of a bride whose footsteps never ceased, a wound that never closed, a silence that grew heavier with each generation that tried to bury it. And it begins not with drums, not with lanterns, not even with the sound of sobbing behind silk curtains. It begins with a whisper, the whisper of the red sedan. It was not my first journey into forgotten places, nor my first time being regarded with the cautious eyes of villagers who would rather I pass through quickly and leave nothing behind. Yet something about this village held me fast, as though unseen hands had already closed the gate behind me. I must tell you who I am, for otherwise you may not understand why I pursued the tale at all. I am a man of books, of museums and ink, a collector of customs and stories that others consider trivial. My homeland is far from the bamboo groves and terraced fields of the East. I was born to gray skies and stone streets. But I have long believed that the truest measure of humanity lies not in the grand events of kings and generals, but in the whispers passed from parent to child, in the small superstitions that cling like cobwebs to the corners of a home. And so I traveled, from shrines half swallowed by vines, to marketplaces where the cries of merchants mingled with the chants of monks. I gathered what I could. Always listening, always writing. It was inevitable then that the rumor of the red sedan would find me. When I first entered the village, it was late afternoon. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Children paused in their games to stare at me. An outsider, my clothes and accent marking me as a man from far away. I smiled, though they did not smile back. The inn where I found lodging was modest. Wooden beams dark with age, paper lanterns that had long since yellowed. The innkeeper, a bent old man with eyes sharp as flint, asked no questions. He showed me to my room with the efficiency of one who wished to be rid of me. Only once did his gaze linger, when I set my notebook upon the table. "You write too much," he muttered in his own tongue, believing perhaps that I would not understand. But I had studied enough to catch the meaning. Words call what should not be called. That evening, I sat in the small dining room with a bowl of rice and vegetables, listening. It is remarkable what one hears when one pretends not to listen. The villagers spoke in low tones, and though they did not mention the sedan outright, their words circled it like moths around a flame. A man spoke of avoiding the willow road when the moon was bright. A woman cautioned her daughter never to hum wedding songs after dark. An old crone tapped her pipe against the table and whispered, "It is not the sedan that walks. It is her sorrow." Each fragment, each hesitation, was like a thread. I gathered them in my mind, weaving them into a pattern I could not yet see. You must understand my state of mind then. For many years I had pursued such stories, always on the edge of truth but never crossing it. I had filled journals with accounts of fox spirits, of river maidens, of monks who spoke to the dead. Yet always when I closed the book, I returned to the rational world. The fire crackled, the ink dried, and life continued. But in that village, the air itself seemed weighted with belief. Their silence was louder than words. It pressed upon me until I began to feel that if I did not discover the truth, I too would be swallowed by it. The next morning I walked the village paths. Bamboo fences leaned like tired old men, and shrines sat crooked among the stones. I passed a courtyard where women hung red cloth to dry, and for an instant the fabric swayed in the breeze in such a way that it seemed like bridal veils. My heart stuttered, though I told myself it was only imagination. Children followed me at a distance, whispering, daring one another to approach. At last, a boy no older than 12 called out, "You came for the red bride!" His companions silenced him at once, pulling him back as if he had spoken a forbidden curse. Their fear was not the playful fear of children, but the genuine dread of those taught from birth to avoid certain words. At the marketplace, I purchased ink and paper from a merchant whose hands trembled as he wrapped the bundle. "You write her name, she will come," he warned. "Who is she?" I asked. He only shook his head and refused to meet my eyes. That night, as I sat in my room with my lamp burning low, I began to sketch the fragments I had gathered. A road by the willows, a sedan that walks without bearers, lanterns swaying without wind, the sound of weeping. I wrote them not as conclusions, but as questions, each word like a seed pressed into the page. As the hours deepened, I felt a strange tension in the air, as though the very act of writing had drawn unseen attention. The paper lantern above my desk flickered, though the shutters were closed. From somewhere outside came the faint tap of wood against stone, like sandals striking the earth. I held my breath. The sound passed. Yet I did not sleep easily that night. The following day, I sought out the elder of the village. He was a stooped figure with a face weathered like bark, his white beard stained with tea. At first he greeted me politely, offering the courtesy due to any guest. But when I asked of the legend, his expression hardened. "It is not for you," he said. "It is not even for us. It belongs to her." I pressed gently, speaking of my studies, of the importance of preserving traditions before they vanish. At length the old man sighed. "There are stories that should be forgotten," he murmured, "but forgetting does not loosen their grip. The red sedan is not a tale. It is a shadow, and shadows cling to those who seek them." He would say no more. I walked back to the inn as the sun slipped behind the hills, the light thinning into dusk. The village grew quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Smoke rose from chimneys, lanterns flickered in windows, but the streets emptied. Even the dogs retreated to their corners. I stood at the edge of the willow road, staring into the gathering dark. The branches swayed gently, and for a moment I thought I saw a glimmer of red deep within. I told myself it was only the afterglow of sunset. Yet the image stayed with me, sharp as a cut, silk stirring where no wind blew. That night the innkeeper came to my room uninvited. He looked at the note spread across my desk, his mouth tightening. "You will leave," he said simply. "Tomorrow?" I asked. "Now." His voice shook, though not with anger, with fear. "Why?" I pressed. He closed his eyes, then opened them again, sharp and wet. "Because she listens, because she waits for curious men who do not belong. And once she notices you..." He stopped, as though the rest of the sentence was too heavy to speak. He left without another word. I sat awake long into the night, listening to the creak of the old inn, the whisper of wind through bamboo. Each sound seemed louder than it should have been, as though the world itself leaned closer to my ear. I tried to convince myself that I was merely a scholar, that I chased only stories. But I could not shake the feeling that the story now chased me. That is how my curiosity became something more than study. It became a weight pressing on my chest, a coldness in my spine. I knew then, with the certainty of a man who has crossed a threshold, that I would not leave. Not yet. For the red sedan was no longer merely a legend whispered in tea houses. It was here. It was waiting. And somehow, I feared and yet could not resist. I was already part of it. And so my curiosity, which once led me only to dusty books and forgotten shrines, now led me to the edge of something I could neither understand nor escape. The red sedan had noticed me. It is a strange thing, how the past refuses to remain buried. The villagers may keep their silence, the children may avert their eyes, but the earth remembers. The stones, the trees, the very air, they all hold fragments of what once happened here. And sometimes, if you are patient enough, or foolish enough, those fragments arrange themselves into a story. That is what I heard piece by piece from a reluctant elder, from murmurs at the well, from scraps whispered as though each word carried danger. It was the story of a wedding. Long ago, before even the gray-haired men were born, the village was ruled not by officials or soldiers, but by wealth. There was a family of merchants, prosperous, proud, feared. They owned the rice fields, the mills, even the stones upon which the villagers walked. To fall into their debt was to be bound in chains. To oppose them was to disappear. And into this village was born a girl. Her name has been lost, or perhaps deliberately erased, but all agreed she was beautiful. Her face was said to shine like lantern light on still water, her laughter bright as the chime of bells. Yet beauty in such places is not a blessing. It is a chain of another kind. When she came of age, her family was approached by the wealthy merchants. Their son, spoiled and cruel, had fixed his eye upon her. The family resisted at first, for they knew the boy's nature. But poverty is a heavy hand, and the merchants pressed their weight until there was no choice. A marriage was arranged. It was declared an auspicious day, chosen by astrologers, marked by drums and banners. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, for though weddings were usually occasions of joy, this one carried the air of mourning. The girl did not wish it. Everyone knew. Her tears stained her sleeves even as seamstresses embroidered her gown. Yet no one intervened. For who dares to stand between wealth and its desire? The preparations were lavish. The sedan was lacquered a red so bright it seemed to bleed beneath the sun. Silk curtains were hung, embroidered with cranes and peonies. Musicians were summoned, their drums tested until the beats rolled like thunder. I imagined the village on that morning, the streets lined with curious eyes, the air heavy with incense and expectation. Red paper charms fluttered from doors, banners stretched across gates, and at the center of it all, the girl, her face pale, her eyes downcast, her lips pressed shut as though sealing in a final breath. Her mother wept quietly behind a sleeve. Her father stood stiff, his silence louder than any protest. They say she did not step into the sedan willingly. They say her feet dragged and her relatives had to lift her inside. The silk curtains fell, and the village exhaled, as though the act itself sealed a fate that none could undo. The procession began. Drums thundered, firecrackers burst, musicians played wedding songs that should have sounded joyous, yet to many ears rang like dirges. The sedan swayed with each step of the bearers, its red lanterns swaying as though moved by a wind that no one felt. Children ran alongside, laughing as children do, yet even they fell silent when they glimpsed the pale hand that clutched the curtain within. A hand that trembled as though begging for release. I must tell you what I felt as I pieced together this memory. It was not merely a tale recounted by others. It pressed upon me with such clarity that I could almost hear the drums myself, almost smell the acrid smoke of firecrackers, almost see the red of that silk burning against the gray of the sky. The day chosen was auspicious. Yes, but auspicious for whom? For the family that gained wealth and favor? For the groom who claimed what he desired? Certainly not for the bride whose cries were hidden beneath the thunder of drums. There is a cruelty in such customs, a cruelty masked as tradition, as destiny, as duty. To the villagers, perhaps it was simply the way of things. A girl must obey, a family must endure. But what of the girl herself? What of the life bound and broken behind those red curtains? No one asked, no one dared, and so the procession marched on. The story fragments here, like a scroll torn and scattered by wind. Some say the girl reached her husband's house and never left again. Others say she vanished before she could even cross the threshold. Her sedan arriving empty, the curtains stirring though no one sat within. But one detail remains constant. That day was the beginning. The day when joy was twisted into sorrow, when a bride was carried not toward her future, but toward her death. The red sedan first walked on that day, and it has walked ever since. As I listened, I found myself struck by a cruel irony. The villagers had called it an auspicious day. They spoke of fortune, of prosperity, of stars aligned. Yet fortune for one is often misfortune for another. A day bright for the groom's family was a night eternal for the bride. This, I thought, is how curses are born. Not from black magic, not from ritual, but from injustice too great to be buried. When the elder finished his account, he would not meet my gaze. His eyes drifted to the shrine in the corner, where a stick of incense smoldered, its smoke curling upward like a plea unanswered. "We do not speak her name," he said softly. "Names are anchors. If you call her, she will come, and she is still waiting." I walked back through the village in silence, my thoughts heavy with the weight of that long-ago day. The air seemed dimmer, as though the memory itself had bled into the present. Every red cloth I passed, every curtain stirring in the wind, seemed to echo her unseen presence. And I realized with a chill that the story was no longer something I merely collected. It had already taken root within me, as though I had been sitting not in the present, but in that long-ago morning, watching the sedan depart with the unwilling bride. That night, as I lay upon the hard bed of the inn, I dreamed. I dreamed of drums beating like a heartbeat beneath the earth. I dreamed of silk curtains closing, of hands clutching in desperation. I dreamed of a voice, soft, broken, whispering a single word. Why? When I woke, the dream clung to me like damp clothes. The air in the room was heavy, and for a moment I thought I smelled incense burning, though no stick had been lit. That was the day I came to understand the heart of the legend. The red sedan is not merely a ghostly carriage drifting through the night. It is a memory, a wound, a question left unanswered. What becomes of a life stolen by duty, by silence, by fear? The villagers may call it auspicious. The astrologers may call it destiny. But the bride called it by another name. She called it prison. And so, though centuries have passed, she still walks. Night in the village is unlike night in the city. There are no lamps, no hum of traffic, no careless chatter of neighbors. Only darkness, vast and heavy, stitched with the faint glow of lanterns swaying before doorways, their light trembling as though afraid to stand alone. It was in such a silence that I lay awake. The inn's walls were thin. I could hear the breathing of the family in the next room, the shifting of chickens in the yard. Beyond that, nothing, only the weight of night pressing upon the roof. Sleep would not come. My thoughts circled around the story I had heard, around the girl in the red sedan. And then, I heard it. At first I thought it was my imagination, a dull rhythm, faint as if carried from a great distance. Thump, Thump, thump. It was not the beating of my heart. It was slower, heavier, like the cadence of drums. I sat up, straining my ears. The sound did not stop. It grew clearer, each beat followed by a slight creak, as though wood strained under weight. The inn's dog whimpered. Somewhere a rooster stirred uneasily, as if dawn had arrived too soon. I rose and went to the window. The street outside was empty. A pale moon hung above, veiled by drifting clouds. Shadows clung to the eaves, and the wind carried with it the faint smell of incense, though no shrine was near. Then I saw it. At the far end of the lane, where the road bent toward the old well, a red glow shimmered. Faint at first, like embers buried beneath ash, then stronger, painting the stones in a bloody hue. I froze. My breath caught. Out of the shadows emerged four figures, their outlines wavering as though half-formed. Each bore upon their shoulders the poles of a sedan chair, its lacquer gleaming crimson even in the moonlight. Silk curtains hung heavy on its sides, embroidered patterns shifting as though alive. No sound of footsteps accompanied them, only the dull, rhythmic thump of unseen drums, echoing through the silence. I pressed my forehead against the cold wood of the window, unable to look away. The sedan moved with unnatural grace, gliding rather than swaying, as though its bearers were not bound by flesh or weight. The lanterns upon its frame burned with a sickly red flame, casting long, quivering shadows across the walls. And then I saw a hand, pale as bone, slender as the stem of a withered flower. It reached out from behind the silk curtain, fingers trembling, grasping at nothing. For a moment the hand lingered in the night air, as though pleading, as though searching for release. Then just as quickly, it withdrew, the curtain falling back into place with a whisper like a sigh. The procession halted at the old well. The drums ceased. Silence descended with such force it seemed to press upon my chest. The sedan remained still. The figures did not move. Even the wind held its breath. I thought I saw the curtain stir, as though someone within leaned forward, watching. I could not see a face, but I felt the weight of a gaze, cold and unyielding, fixed upon me. Panic clawed at my throat. My rational mind told me to step away, to close the shutters, to pray. Yet something deeper, some morbid curiosity, held me rooted. Then, without warning, the drums began again. Faster now, louder. The bearers lifted the sedan once more and turned, their path leading away from the well. The glow faded with each step, swallowed by the darkness, until nothing remained but silence. But the silence was not empty. It was full, too full, as though something lingered still. I closed the shutters and stumbled back to bed, my hands trembling. Sleep, when it came, was broken and shallow. In my dreams I heard the drums still, pulsing like a second heartbeat, and behind the rhythm, a whisper, soft and sorrowful. "Do you see me?" When dawn came, I went out to the street, half expecting to find nothing, to laugh at my own fear. But at the old well, where the procession had halted, I found something. A scrap of red silk, damp with dew, clung to the stones. When I touched it, the fabric was icy cold. And as I held it in my hand, I realized the truth. The legend was not merely story. The red sedan walked still. Morning arrived pale and cold, though the sun was already high above the mountains. I had not truly slept. My body ached with the weight of broken dreams. Still, I forced myself to rise, compelled by the memory of what I had seen. I wandered through the village in daylight, hoping reason might dissolve the terror of the night. Yet the well remained where I had seen it, ancient stones darkened with moss, and the scrap of silk I had picked up. I kept it hidden in my pocket, though its chill clung to my palm like frost. The villagers greeted me with the same polite distance as before. They did not ask about my night. They did not look toward the well. Their silence was too deliberate, too rehearsed. It was the silence of people who had learned to pretend that something did not exist. At last I encountered the school teacher again, the man who had first whispered of the legend. Seeing the exhaustion on my face, he seemed to know without words what I had witnessed. His lips tightened, then he beckoned me to follow. We passed through narrow lanes until we reached a low building near the edge of the village. The wood was dark, warped by time, its roof sagging. This, he murmured, was once the ancestral hall. Inside, the air smelled of dust and incense, long extinguished. Shafts of sunlight pierced through cracks in the roof, illuminating motes that drifted like ash. The walls were lined with scrolls and faded paintings, their silk backing frayed, colors dulled by years. The teacher gestured for me to look. The first painting showed a wedding procession. Villagers carried lanterns, musicians played drums and flutes, and at the center was the red sedan chair. Its lacquer was fresh, its curtains bright. Yet even in faded ink, the bride within was obscured, her face hidden beneath a heavy veil. The second painting was darker, the same sedan, but this time, the crowd appeared different. Faces were blurred, as though smeared by water. The musicians' drums looked more like funeral instruments, their sticks raised in stiff, unnatural poses. And though the bride's veil remained, one could see pale fingers clutching its edge, pressing outward as if trying to escape. I stepped closer, my skin prickling. The third painting chilled me to the core. It showed a chamber lit only by a single lantern. A bed was set in the center, draped with crimson cloth. Upon it sat the bride, her veil lifted just enough to reveal her mouth, open in a silent cry. The groom was nowhere to be seen. Behind her, shadows gathered in the corners of the room, long arms reaching. Though the brushstrokes were crude, there was something alive in them, as if the figures had absorbed some essence of reality, some memory too powerful to die. I asked the teacher where these came from. He shook his head. No one knows. They have hung here for generations. Some say they were painted by a monk who witnessed the wedding. Others say by the bride herself before. He stopped. His eyes darted to the corners of the hall, as if afraid to speak further. I pressed him. Before what? At last he whispered, before she vanished. The word lingered in the stale air. I turned back to the paintings. A pattern revealed itself. Celebration, distortion, despair. It was not merely a record, it was a descent, a progression from joy into horror. And then I noticed something I had missed. In the corner of each painting, nearly invisible against the faded silk, was the same small motif, a crimson flower, petals drooping as though heavy with blood. Not once, but 3 times. A signature, perhaps, or a warning. The longer I stared, the less they seemed like paintings. The bride's cries seemed to echo faintly in the hall. The shadows appeared to shift, elongating when I glanced away. My chest tightened with the sensation of being watched, not by the teacher, but by the painted eyes hidden behind the veil. I staggered back. The floor creaked beneath me, and the sound jolted me free of the trance. The teacher placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice was low, urgent. You must not look too long. She knows when someone sees her. That is how the curse travels. We left the hall in silence. Outside, the sunlight felt weaker, as though filtered through smoke. My mind throbbed with questions, yet none I dared ask aloud. That night when I returned to the inn, I thought of the paintings again. I thought of the veiled bride, her silent scream. And though I tried to close my eyes, sleep eluded me. For every time my lids grew heavy, I imagined the rustle of silk, the tremble of a pale hand pressing outward from behind a curtain. I began to wonder, had I already looked too long? Had she seen me? That night, the innkeeper offered me a different room. He claimed it was larger, quieter, better suited for a traveler who needed rest. His tone was polite, but his eyes avoided mine, and I knew better. They wanted me far from the ancestral hall, from the paintings, from questions that should not be asked. Still, I accepted. Perhaps a change of air would soothe the weight on my chest. The new chamber was tucked at the back of the inn, its window facing the narrow lane, where shadows gathered thick between the houses. Inside, the bed was draped in faded red cloth. I remember pausing at the sight of it, the fabric darker with age, frayed at the edges, but unmistakably crimson, the color of weddings. The innkeeper noticed my hesitation. He said quickly, "It is just an old custom, nothing more." Then he left without waiting for a reply, sliding the wooden door shut with a finality that unsettled me. The room smelled faintly of incense, though no stick burned. The silence there was heavier than elsewhere, as though sound itself refused to linger. I unpacked my journal, attempting to write what I had seen in the hall that day. The brush scraped softly against paper, but soon even that small comfort faltered. My hand grew unsteady, words blurred. A draft brushed my cheek, though the window was closed. And then, so faint at first I thought it memory, the sound came. A sob. It was the softest of sounds, fragile as a thread. A woman's sob, low and trembling, muffled as though from behind cloth. I froze, brush suspended mid-stroke. The sound came again, clearer. It was not outside. It was here, in the chamber. I turned, heart thudding. The bed stood in the corner, its red canopy hanging like a shroud. The sobbing grew louder, steady now, each breath laden with despair. It came from the bed. I wanted to move, to leave the room, but my legs betrayed me. Something stronger than fear held me rooted, a compulsion, as if the room itself demanded I witness what it held. Slowly I stepped closer. The canopy swayed, though no hand touched it. From within, the sobs deepened into broken cries, the kind torn from someone who knows there is no escape. I whispered, "Who's there?" The cries stopped. Silence pressed in, thick as stone. Then in a voice barely audible, a woman answered, "Please, don't make me go." The air drained from my lungs. My hand trembled as I reached for the canopy. But before I could pull it aside, the cries returned, louder, anguished, filling the chamber. I staggered back, covering my ears, yet the sound burrowed into my skull. It was not merely heard, it was felt, a vibration in my bones. And beneath the weeping, another sound rose, the hollow beat of a drum, slow, deliberate, a wedding drum. Dong, dong, dong. It echoed like a heartbeat from beneath the earth. The cries reached a pitch that made the canopy shake, dust sifting down from the beams above. And then, abruptly, it all stopped. No sobs, no drums, nothing but silence. The canopy stilled. I forced myself forward, though terror clawed at my throat. With a shaking hand, I pulled the cloth aside. The bed was empty. For a moment, I thought it had all been illusion. My body sagged with relief. But then I saw it, pressed into the pillow, faint yet undeniable. The imprint of a face. Two hollows for eyes. A curve of lips parted in despair. The mark of someone who had lain there, weeping. I stumbled back, my heel striking something beneath the bed frame. I crouched and drew it out. A folded piece of silk, stiff with age. It was a bridal veil, crimson turned nearly black, its edges frayed. When I touched it, a chill shot through me, colder than winter. And in the silence of the room, I heard once more that broken whisper, "Please, don't make me go." I dropped the veil and fled the chamber. The innkeeper's wife met me in the corridor, her face pale as ash. She said nothing, but the way her eyes flicked toward the red-draped door told me all I needed to know. She had heard it too. That night I did not sleep. I sat awake in the dim common room, the veil's memory burning in my mind. And in the dark I began to understand. What haunted this village was not a tale to entertain travelers. It was a wound, still bleeding beneath the skin of time. And I had touched it. The morning after the sobs in the bridal chamber, the village seemed unchanged. The sun rose pale over the tiled roofs. Smoke drifted lazily from hearths. Children chased each other through the dust. But for me, the world had shifted. Every smile I passed seemed fragile, painted over something darker. I needed answers. I began by returning to the ancestral hall. The innkeeper resisted at first, but curiosity, or perhaps guilt, softened him. He handed me a key that looked older than the door it opened, muttering only, "Do not stay long." Inside, the air was colder than before, as if it had not been touched by daylight for centuries. The paintings stared at me from the walls, faces of brides in crimson veils, their expressions hidden, their eyes downcast. One canvas drew me closer, a bride painted in exquisite detail, her silk robes luminous against the black background. Yet beneath the layers of pigment, the artist had captured something unsettling. The faint curve of lips drawn too tight, the suggestion of tears glistening beneath her lashes. At the bottom corner, barely legible, was a line of characters. The innkeeper's wife, who had followed at a distance, read it aloud in a whisper, "Bound in life, bound in death." Later in the market square, I found the oldest man in the village. His back was bent like a bow, his eyes cloudy yet sharp when they fixed on me. When I asked about the painting, he shook his head violently. But as I pressed, his resistance softened, worn down not by my insistence, but by the weight of his own memory. He motioned for me to sit beneath the shade of a willow tree. And there, in a voice cracked with age, he told me the history. "Long ago," he said, "the lord of the land arranged a marriage for his only daughter. She was young, barely more than a girl, but her beauty was said to rival the moon itself. Her heart, however, belonged to another, a scholar too poor, too unworthy for the Lord's ambitions. The wedding was set against her will. On the appointed day, a red bridal sedan was sent to fetch her. But when the bearers lifted the curtain, they found the bride weeping, her face as pale as paper. She begged her father. She begged the sky. None listened. That night the bride was carried into the chamber prepared for her. Witnesses said the cries did not stop. All through the night the sounds of weeping and fists against the walls echoed, but no one dared intervene. By dawn, silence. When they entered, they found the bed empty. Only the veil remained. The old man paused, his gaze far away. Then he leaned closer and whispered the part that chilled me to my marrow. "They say she did not die that night. She was taken, buried alive beneath the earth, in a ritual meant to bind her spirit to the house of her husband, so her soul would never stray." My throat tightened. "Buried alive?" He nodded, his voice trembling. "It was the custom of some families then. If a bride resisted, if she defied the union, she was forced into the earth with her veil still on. A wife in death, if not in life. Her cries were said to echo through the soil for days." He shut his eyes as if the memory of those cries still haunted him. I left him shaken, the weight of his story pressing heavily against me. But that night in the inn, I found further proof. In a chest near the stairwell, half hidden beneath moth-eaten cloth, I discovered a bundle of scrolls. Records of the village, written in fading ink. Among them was one marked with a seal shaped like a lotus. The scroll told of a young bride whose death had never been explained. It spoke of rites of soil and silence, of a chamber beneath the earth where a wife was bound in eternal obedience. The words blurred as I read, but one line burned clear. "Her spirit shall ride the red sedan on moonlit nights, seeking one to hear her plea." That night, sleep eluded me again. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw her, trapped beneath the earth, veil pressed to her lips, tears soaking into soil that would not let her go. And I knew, with a certainty that left me trembling, the sobs I had heard in the chamber were hers, the cries of a bride buried alive, echoing still, centuries later. The next morning I walked through the village with the old man's words still echoing in my mind. Buried alive, bound in death, cries through the soil. Every face I passed seemed to tighten when they saw me. Women lowered their eyes, clutching baskets closer to their chests. Men turned their backs, busying themselves with tools that did not need tending. Even the children, usually so careless, grew quiet in my presence, watching me with wide, uneasy eyes. I realized then that I was no longer simply an outsider. I had become something more dangerous, a witness. At the tea house, I tried to ask questions, careful, gentle, framing them as curiosity about local customs. The owner poured my tea with trembling hands but answered nothing. His wife shook her head violently at every word, as though even listening might summon misfortune. Finally, she leaned close, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "You must leave before the 15th night." Before I could press further, she snapped upright, eyes darting to the doorway, where another villager stood watching, her lips sealed, her body stiff as bamboo. Later that day, I passed the school where children scribbled characters on slates. The teacher, a stern man in a gray robe, greeted me politely. I asked him about the paintings in the ancestral hall, about the scrolls I had read. His face drained of color. "The hall is not for you," he said sharply, though his voice quavered. "The past is not for you." I pushed. "But the story, the bride, she—" His hand struck the table. The children jumped. "Enough!" And then softer, almost a plea. "Some things are meant to sleep beneath the earth. If you wake them, they will not rest again." That evening I wandered into the fields beyond the houses. There I found an old woman kneeling before a small shrine, lighting sticks of incense that smoked upward like pale fingers. I knelt beside her, speaking softly. "Tell me," I asked, "what binds this village in silence?" Her eyes glistened in the fading light. For a moment I thought she might answer, but instead she placed one incense stick into my hand, pressing it firmly until the ash broke against my skin. Her voice was no louder than the rustle of the grass. "You cannot free the dead without paying the price of the living." And then she turned away, leaving me with the burning incense trembling between my fingers. By nightfall, the unease had thickened. No one came to the tea house. The streets were deserted, shutters closed tight against the evening breeze. Even the dogs were silent. From my window at the inn, I saw the village square empty beneath the lantern's glow. Only one figure moved, a man carrying a drum, circling slowly, tapping once at each corner of the square. A single hollow beat, then silence. Another beat, silence. It was not music, it was warning. I returned to my room, my mind heavy with dread. The innkeeper was waiting at my door. He pressed a cup of rice wine into my hand and whispered, "Drink and forget." But I could not forget. I told him of the cries I had heard in the bridal chamber, of the scrolls, of the old man's tale. His eyes shone with a fear so raw it seemed to hollow his face. He grabbed my wrist, shaking his head violently. "Do not speak her name," he begged. "Do not call her here." His voice broke, a whisper of defeat. "We all live with the curse. We all survive by silence. If you speak, she will come." When he left, I sat in the dark, the cup of wine untouched. And in that silence, I finally understood. The villagers were not simply hiding a shameful past. They were guarding against it, shielding themselves from something they believed still lingered. Something that listened, waiting for its name to be spoken. The silence was not ignorance. It was survival. That night, as I drifted on the edge of uneasy sleep, I thought I heard again the faintest sound of wood creaking, as though poles of a sedan chair shifted under unseen weight. And beneath it, carried by the hush of the village, the whisper of a veil brushing against the earth. The 15th night arrived. From morning until dusk, the village moved with a peculiar stillness, as if holding its breath. Men carried bundles of wood into their homes. Women sealed windows with strips of paper charms. Children were kept indoors. No one lingered on the streets. By the time the sun dipped behind the jagged hills, the lanes were empty. Lanterns had been extinguished, doors barred, shutters bolted. I walked through the silence, my footsteps loud against the stone path. It felt as though the whole village had vanished, leaving only the echo of my presence. Above, the moon hung swollen and white, casting its cold light over the abandoned square. A wind moved through, carrying with it the faint scent of incense and something else. Damp earth, newly turned. The innkeeper begged me not to leave my room that night. "Stay inside, block your ears. Do not look," he had said, his voice cracking with urgency. But curiosity was stronger than fear. Or perhaps it was something else. Something pulling me forward, whispering in a voice I could not quite hear. And so I stood in the square as the temple bell tolled once, marking the hour of the full moon. At first there was only silence. Then, a faint creak like the slow bending of old wood. It came from the northern path that led into the village, the path overgrown with weeds where no one ever walked. My breath caught as I saw lanterns appear in the distance, not held by hands. They floated, swaying, their lights shivering like flames trapped in glass. Behind them, shadows began to form. 4 figures, pale and gaunt, their outlines wavering as if half hidden by mist. Each bore a pole across a bony shoulder, and between them hung a sedan chair, lacquered red, its surface dulled with age yet gleaming where the moonlight struck. The bridal palanquin. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though the bearers were not of flesh but of memory itself. The poles bent, though the air was empty. Yet the weight was real. I could feel it pressing against the square, thickening the night air. As it drew nearer, I heard it, the rhythm of feet against stone, out of step, hollow as if striking from beneath the earth. Clop, a pause. Clop, and then, weaving between the beats, a sound that froze my marrow. The faint jangle of bridal ornaments, swaying with each invisible step. The palanquin entered the square. Its curtains, once crimson, now darkened with stains of time, fluttered though no wind stirred. For a long moment it stood motionless in the center, bathed in moonlight. I should have turned away. I should have fled. But my eyes were fixed, and slowly the veil parted. Inside I saw her, a bride clad in the red silk of centuries past, her head bowed beneath the heavy wedding crown. Her hands, pale as porcelain, rested limply on her lap. From her sleeves trailed threads of soil, crumbling with each movement. She did not raise her face, yet I felt her gaze upon me, piercing through layers of silk and shadow, burning into the marrow of my bones. The air grew colder. My breath clouded before me, though no frost should exist in summer's night. Then the drum began. Somewhere unseen it struck. Slow, deliberate, each beat reverberating through the square like the pulse of a buried heart. With every strike, the palanquin shuddered, its poles creaking, its fabric trembling. The lanterns swayed violently, though no wind moved. Shadows crawled across the ground, stretching long, clutching toward me like skeletal hands. And from within the palanquin came a sound that made my blood curdle, a sob. Soft, muffled, as though seeping through layers of silk and soil. I stumbled backward, yet my feet refused to flee. My body felt bound by unseen cords. The sobbing grew louder, cracking into wails, the voice of a woman torn between grief and rage. I thought I heard words, but they were not of my tongue. They slithered through the night, old syllables weighted with centuries of suffering. And then, in one violent motion, the bride's head lifted. The veil slipped, revealing eyes black as pitch, hollow and endless, yet glistening with tears that were not of water, but of ink staining her cheeks as they fell. Her mouth opened, a scream rising, yet no sound came. Only silence, a silence more dreadful than any cry. The palanquin jolted forward. Its bearers, faceless and gaunt, carried it straight toward me. I could not move. The ground itself seemed to clutch at my ankles. As it drew close, the air pressed against my chest, crushing, suffocating. I thought my ribs might splinter. Ribs. The bride's hollow gaze locked onto mine, and I felt her story pour into me. Flashes of earth closing above, the weight of stones, the darkness of centuries. Her suffering flooded my veins, Her sorrow pierced my mind. I was drowning in her death. Just as the palanquin neared, ready to engulf me, a sudden clang shattered the square. The temple bell struck once more, deep and thunderous. The lanterns flickered violently. The figures shuddered, their outlines unraveling. The palanquin shook, its red lacquer peeling into smoke. The bride's veil tore away in the phantom wind, whipping through the square before dissolving into nothing. Her face blurred, fading, though her eyes lingered a moment longer, burning into mine with a plea I could not understand. And then, all was gone. The square lay empty once more, bathed only in the cold, indifferent light of the full moon. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with her presence, with her longing, with her rage. And I knew then, the legend was no longer a story. It was alive. That night I did not sleep. The innkeeper's warnings, the bell's toll, the vision of the crimson palanquin, none of it would release me. When I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the hollow gaze, the tears like black ink. And behind those eyes, I sensed something unspoken. Not merely wrath, not merely grief, but a voice that longed to be heard. And so, at the edge of dawn, when the first gray light brushed the horizon, I lit a lantern and left the safety of my room. The square was empty, but the air still clung to me with the memory of the night before. I walked toward the old path where the palanquin had appeared. The weeds parted beneath my steps. The earth smelled damp, as though freshly turned. Somewhere ahead, a shrine leaned against the hillside. Its wood rotted, its paper charms faded into dust. I felt drawn to it, as though invisible threads pulled me forward. Inside the shrine, dust coated the floor, and spider webs draped from the beams. Yet the air was not dead. It thrummed faintly, like the echo of a hidden drum. On the altar lay remnants of offerings, a bowl cracked with age, incense sticks reduced to powder, a faded strip of red silk. I reached out to touch it. The moment my fingers brushed the fabric, the air shifted. The lantern flame flickered, then stilled. The silence deepened until I could hear my own heartbeat. Slow, thunderous, unnatural. And then behind me, a whisper. "Why do you look upon me?" I turned. There she was, the bride standing within the dim glow, her robes dragging along the ground as though soaked in water. Her veil had fallen back, revealing her face, pale, fragile, yet cracked like porcelain, as if the years beneath the earth had fractured her. Her eyes bore into mine, not with rage now, but with an unbearable weight of sorrow. For a moment I could not speak. My voice clung to my throat, refusing to form. But she waited unmoving, the silence pressing me to answer. I saw you," I whispered. "Last night, the palanquin, it came for me." Her lips curved into something between a smile and a wound. "It comes every full moon, for centuries, seeking what was denied me." I gathered my courage. "What happened to you?" Her voice when it came was like the rustle of soil pouring into a grave. "They chose my husband. They chose my fate. I was not asked, only ordered. My family, bound by tradition, offered me like cattle. A good match, they said, an auspicious day, a red veil, a bridal chair. But I did not go to a husband." Her eyes darkened. "They buried me." The words pierced the silence like a blade. They sealed me beneath the earth, with his coffin beside mine. A bride, still breathing, sealed alive to accompany the dead. I clawed at the wood until my nails tore away. I screamed until my voice was swallowed by soil. But no one came. The earth became my veil, the darkness, my wedding hall. That was my marriage. Her voice cracked into a sob, the sound fragile, unbearable. I shivered, imagining the suffocating weight of soil pressing against my chest, the silence of death creeping while breath still remained. I whispered, "And now, you wander?" "I linger," she replied. "I am bound to the palanquin, bound to the vows I never gave. The villagers know. They silence their tongues for fear of joining me, but they cannot silence me. I return each full moon, reminding them of the curse they buried. Yet still they do nothing. They hide. They pray. They forget. Her gaze locked onto mine. You did not hide. The air grew colder. The lantern flame shrank, struggling. Why do you look upon me, stranger from far lands? She whispered. Why do you not turn away like the others? I swallowed hard. Because I believe your voice deserves to be heard. Her head tilted, as though tasting the truth of my words. Then for the first time her face softened, the cracks in her porcelain skin trembling with something close to relief. She stepped closer, her presence chilling, her robes whispering across the floor. Will you listen? She asked, and so she told me more. Of her laughter as a girl, cut short when her family bartered her away. Of the betrothal she begged against, ignored by the elders who claimed, it is your duty. Of the day they dressed her in silk, painted her lips, placed the veil upon her head, while she wept beneath it. Of the slow procession toward the groom's coffin, where whispers of celebration masked the truth of her burial. Every word dripped with anguish, yet beneath it all, I sensed something else. Not only the desire for vengeance, but a desperate yearning for freedom, for release from a fate she never chose. When her tale ended, silence returned. The lantern burned low. My throat was dry, my heart pounding. What do you want of me? I asked at last. Her answer was soft, almost tender. Not vengeance, not worship, only to leave this path, to walk beyond the Palanquin's shadow, to be free. Her gaze burned into mine, dark and endless. You are not of this land. You owe no debt to its silence. Perhaps you can do what they will not. Carry me beyond. Break the vow that binds. The shrine trembled faintly, dust sifting from the beams. I felt her voice not only in my ears but in my chest, heavy, insistent. And though terror gripped me, though every instinct screamed to flee, I found myself nodding. I will try, I said. For a long moment, she only looked at me, the weight of centuries locked in her gaze. Then slowly, her form dimmed, dissolving like smoke, leaving only the faint trace of her sobs in the air. The red silk strip upon the altar fluttered once, then lay still. And I knew the path before me was set. The day that followed was a blur of unease. The villagers avoided my gaze more than ever. When I walked through the market square, they turned their faces, whispering as though my shadow carried misfortune. Old women spat quietly into the dust. Children were hurried indoors. Even the innkeeper, who once greeted me with cautious kindness, would no longer meet my eyes. They knew. Somehow they knew I had spoken to her. That night, when silence blanketed the village, I returned to the shrine. The red strip of silk still lay upon the altar, its color deeper in the lantern's glow, as if soaking in unseen blood. The moment I touched it, her voice came again. This time not a whisper, but steady, deliberate. You must carry me beyond this village. How? I asked. Through fire and silence. Through the gate they sealed long ago. Her words wove fragments of ritual into my mind, as though she pressed memories into me. The burning of joss paper, the spilling of rice along a path, the chanting of verses the villagers had long since buried in fear. I understood then, this was no simple request. It was a passage, a ritual meant to sever her bond to the cursed Palanquin. I gathered what I could. From the abandoned shrine I found half-burnt incense. From the fields a bundle of straw to weave into effigies. From the market, when no one watched, I took a small bell. Its chime cracked, but still alive. At midnight I began. I laid a line of rice along the path leading out of the village, grain by grain, glistening like pale bones in the moonlight. I lit incense, the smoke rising in trembling coils, carrying my breath into the stillness. And I rang the bell softly, steadily, its sound cracking the silence, like the heartbeat of some ancient ritual. The villagers stayed hidden, but I felt their eyes from behind shutters, heavy with dread. And then she came. The bride, no longer drifting, but walking. Her steps left no trace in the soil, yet the lantern light bent around her, drawn into her presence. She followed the rice path as though it were a road of stars, her veil trailing behind like spilled shadow. "You remember," she said softly, her gaze on the bell. "Not I admitted, "but perhaps you." Her lips curved faintly, almost in sorrow. "It was my dowry bell. It tolled when I left my home. It tolled again when they sealed my grave. Tonight, let it toll once more." But as we walked, the air thickened. The silence of the village was not passive. It pressed against us, resisting. The shadows at the edge of the road deepened into shapes, crooked, faceless, like figures born of smoke and earth. Their limbs twisted, reaching not to harm, but to hold her back, as if the curse itself had grown claws. Her veil fluttered, snagged by invisible hands. She faltered, trembling, her voice breaking into a cry. "They bind me still!" I clenched the bell, ringing it louder, each strike sharper, tearing the air like a blade. The figures shrank with every chime, their forms unraveling into mist. I stepped between them and her, though fear chilled my marrow. "Walk!" I shouted. "Keep walking!" We pressed onward, past the shrine, past the square, past the old well where whispers had first haunted me. With every step, the shadows grew weaker, their hold loosening. The incense burned low, scattering sparks like fireflies across the ground. Finally, we reached the edge of the village, a stone gate, crumbling, sealed with boards and charms yellowed with time. Its wood bore the marks of knives, as though once it had been scratched from the inside. She stopped before it, trembling. "This is where they carried me, where the path ended." Her voice was heavy with centuries of silence. I raised the lantern, its light falling across the faded talismans. The characters were barely visible, but their intent still lingered, binding, sealing, trapping. I felt the weight of generations pressing upon this gate, not to protect, but to conceal. "Break it," she whispered. The air turned colder. My hand trembled as I tore at the first charm, the paper crumbling to ash at my touch. The second came loose, the ink smearing like dried blood. The third resisted, clinging stubbornly. But when the bell tolled once more, it dissolved into dust. The boards groaned. The gate creaked open. Beyond lay the wilderness, trees bending under the moonlight, fields stretching unbound, a world untouched by the curse. The bride stood still, her veil quivering. "Step through," I urged. She looked at me, eyes endless, fragile, searching. "If I cross," she whispered, "I will not return. My voice will be gone. My story will be only yours." I nodded slowly. "Then let me carry it. Let me remember for you." For a heartbeat silence reigned. Then with the faintest smile, a smile not of vengeance but of release, she stepped forward. Her veil brushed against me as she passed. The air shivered, the lantern dimmed, and the weight of centuries lifted like mist at dawn. The palanquin's echo faded. The whispers fell silent. She was gone. I stood alone before the gate, the bell silent in my hand. The rice path lay scattered behind me, nothing more than food for birds. The incense was ash, and the village still watched from the shadows, though they would never admit what had passed. But I knew. I had carried her beyond, and perhaps for the first time in countless years, the crimson bride was free. Dawn came slowly, like a reluctant promise. The mist hung low over the rice paddies, silver and pale, swallowing the last traces of night. For the first time since my arrival, the village lay quiet. Not the suffocating silence of fear, but something thinner, fragile, as though the very air dared to breathe again. I stood at the edge of the stone gate, watching light creep across its weathered surface. The boards that once sealed it were gone. The talismans had turned to dust. The path beyond stretched open, glistening faintly with dew. She was gone. No whisper lingered. No veil trailed in the shadows. Even the faint chill that had haunted every step seemed to have lifted. The villagers emerged one by one, faces pale, wary, but touched with something unfamiliar, relief perhaps, or resignation. They said nothing to me, not a word of thanks, not even acknowledgement. They only looked at the open gate, then at each other, as if afraid that naming what had happened would summon it back. I understood. Some stories are too heavy for a village to carry, better left unspoken, buried under silence. I gathered my few belongings. The innkeeper left my breakfast outside the door without a word. When I passed through the square, the children peeked at me from behind their mother's sleeves, eyes wide, half fearful, half curious. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. By noon I was on the road again, the village shrinking behind me, its tiled roofs half hidden in haze. My steps felt lighter, though the memory of her lingered with every sound of the wind through bamboo. I told myself it was finished, that I had done what little I could, that the crimson bride, bound for centuries, had at last walked free. And yet, even as the road curved into hills, and the last glimpse of the village vanished, I could not shake the thought. Freedom often carries its own shadow. That night I stopped at a small roadside inn miles away. The host greeted me with warmth, offering tea and a place to rest. The chamber was humble, wooden beams, a paper screen, a single oil lamp. So, as I set down my pack, exhaustion weighed on me. I poured the tea, its steam curling gently upward, and for the first time in days I felt something close to peace. I unfastened my pack to take out my journal, intent on recording the events before time eroded them into dream. But as I opened it, my breath caught. Beneath my clothes, folded carefully, lay a piece of silk. Red. So vivid it seemed to pulse with its own light. A bridal veil. For a moment I could not move. The lamp flickered, shadows trembling across the walls. The air turned still, pressing against me like unseen hands. I touched the fabric with hesitant fingers. It was cold, not with the chill of night air, but something deeper, something that clung to the marrow. And then faintly, almost tenderly, a voice brushed against my ear. "You said you would carry my story." The lamp guttered. The tea grew cold. I closed the pack slowly, the weight of silk heavier than stone. Dawn had come, yes. The palanquin had vanished, the gate had opened. But some journeys do not end at the village border. Some follow you. And as I lay awake in that dim inn, veil pressing against my pack, I wondered if freedom had truly been hers, or if it was now mine to bear. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.